Hello, it's episode 62 of Krackle Comics Weekly. I'm Mike, joined by Vince. It's just the two of us this week. Dan couldn't be here, and it's another retro week. And then we changed it up. So I chose the books Vince has to read, and then Vince did the same for me. And we got a wide range. We got books from late 1960s to all the way to 2015. So we saw the rundown. If you watch those, you know what the books are, but you'll find out who picked for who. Though, Vince, for the beginning here, how did you feel about the choices?
Yeah, I mean, I thought they were interesting. So there was still an RNG element. So we basically did, we split 50-50, and then we did RNG for the year, the month, the company. And usually, if you watch our show for most of the time, we unfortunately kind of stick to Marvel and DC just because it's way easier to access a lot of those books and things like that, just various factors. But and then yeah, like Mike said, then once we establish those kinds of RNG numbers, then we can go to data like the Marvel and DC wikis, and we made choices for each other. Um, it's always it's tempting to go and look at the available choices for each other and see like what you would have picked for yourself. I didn't write any of that down, but definitely at least the ones that I mean, obviously the ones that I picked from Mike, I picked them for a reason. But the ones that were picked for me, I did go and look and say like, oh, that would have been interesting as well if I read that. But I don't really have a problem with anything I was chosen to read. One of the things I was like prepared to be slightly annoyed, but it kind of worked out, and I'll get to that eventually. It'll be a surprise.
Well, I guess that kind of hints at my second question, which would be, was there any devious, malicious things to be chosen? Because I think there is one from you. It may be
Um,
two. I definitely did. I did one for you as well, but I don't think it really was as bad as maybe it wasn't as bad as the 2015 book I got. I'll put that in there.
yeah, I mean that's the final book, so we'll get to that eventually. But basically, one of the ones I had to pick from Mike, it's just a really rough period for the company that was chosen. And also like at least me personally, if it's up to my pick, like I try and avoid some of the obvious ones. If you watch our show, a lot of the retro books, especially when we get newer years when there's always a number one, so a lot of times we are reading number one or the start of a run or something like that. I always think it's fun to pick something that's not as like easy and convenient to jump into.
Yeah.
So we had some of that. I don't. Maybe I'll have to recall as I go along, but I don't think I intentionally picked anything really to like piss you off or anything like that. I don't think so.
I our second book, when we get to it, I think there's a little, I think it's half like I want to torture you, but also I did express interest in wanting to check out that particular run, and I got, the best of both worlds on that, of the good and the bad equally, of what's to expect there. But
Yeah, I mean, I don't. We'll get to it. I don't think it was like a torture thing. I think
no,
it was more like a let me try and enlighten him thing. Like if I got a certain like early '90s year or something for you, I'd probably give you like I'd be tempted to give you like an early issue of No Warriors, the ones that I think are genuinely good. But I don't think I rolled anything close to that.
no, you
Um,
didn't.
So like I can't think of other examples like that would have been applicable, but like if it's like a book or character that you've been like iffy about maybe, or like have gone back and forth on, it's like it's a good excuse to like just make you throw it at you, and vice versa.
I would say for mine, there's a healthy dose of some uncovering in there. Well, I think I played it safer than I should have,
Oh,
but
on
that
your
was
on your
also,
picks for me.
yeah. Yeah, I think there's a little safe in there. I think you'll see that I chose a lot more bigger names while you went a little bit more outside the box. But this is definitely as we take up like the first 5 minutes, but it's a different concept of what we've done before. But it's definitely something that I would like to do again, especially with Dan or maybe someone else down the line, because it is a fun kind of, there's a decision making process into it that's different from just go, let's read this. And I think with the whole retro gimmick in itself, I think after 60 some episodes, more if you count before we renumbered, if we want to adjust the conversion over to this channel, if that's the way to do it. But I think we've had a healthy amount of like good key issues, number ones, and other stuff, but you are still bound at the end of the day by the year or month that you get, and possibly by the company. Because, like, 2015 DC, which will be our last book, was not great. Things quickly turn around, but we're not at 2016 with Rebirth yet. We're getting there, but overall, I think we'll jump in, and you have the headline. You're teeing off here with a Daredevil 45 from 1968.
Yes. This is towards the end of Stan Lee's run, art by Gene Colan, and this is picking up directly from the previous issue. And I think that's also another interesting thing. When the retros is not to make myself sound like a super nerd, but especially when like Mike and Dan pick things, like they're not necessarily digging in and seeing like, is that part two of a story? In more modern books, it's super obvious because the name of the story in the wiki will say part three. But it's not always obvious on older issues. So this is in the middle of an arc, and the Jester, who is a pretty lame villain, has framed Daredevil for murder and is drugging him by way of like this chemical altered popcorn in front of the police. Um, and so, since he's been framed for murder, the police are after Daredevil. It's kind of awkward how they like just kind of let Jester walk away, and like the police don't really care about Jester, even though he's also like a costume criminal. Um, but Daredevil escapes, and now everyone is after him. And like I said, Jester walks away as well. Stan tries to make fun of himself for using the word "meanwhile" as a caption instead of Stan's usual drawn out paragraph of nonsense. Daredevil goes down to the subway and he just knocks a stranger out and steals his coat. I mean, granted, he leaves some cash in his pocket so that he can rebuy a coat, I guess. It's, in 1968, before things are like really, really, really mass production of overseas for clothing. That coat was probably expensive. I hope Matt left him enough money. Um, And then Stan is making fun of himself even more for how convenient the plotting is because Jester happens to be on the exact same subway, literally right next to Matt as he's trying to be undercover. But of course, he's wearing this coat, but his giant red boots are still apparent, so it gets him caught. And then they just chase each other around more. The chase and the fights lead to the Statue of Liberty. And then while saving a cop who's falling from a helicopter because a rope broke, Daredevil saves the cop, and then the cop immediately sticks a needle in him and drugs him, and he's brought to jail. And kind of the cliffhanger is that, because of dumb Marvel logic, but also like it's ironic because, well, all right, because of dumb Marvel logic, he shows up in jail, and they don't want to take his mask off because of some legal loophole. But of course, the like janitor slash like prison guard dude is like, I don't care about that. So that's the cliffhanger. He's about to take his mask off. So it's kind of funny because, obviously Daredevil's been to jail several times, and it kind of makes sense. He's very much a street level vigilante and also the law, background. But, the major time we saw was in Ed Brubaker. I wonder if it even happened before this issue. I'm sure it happened at least one time in between. And I know Chip Zdarsky has done it, I believe, and Charles Soule. I don't know that Matt went to prison in that or anything, but I know Charles Soule's whole thing was kind of similar to the cliffhanger here, where it's like this: he was setting up this actual, basis in the Marvel universe of superheroes keeping their masks on, keeping their secret identities when involved in the legal system. And as I said, it ends on a cliffhanger. So this is not only picks up from the previous issue, but continues next issue. So even by 1968, we're kind of into the era of continuing arcs, at least small ones. And then the following one after this arc concludes is the acclaimed Brother Take My Hand issue, where Matt meets a blind Vietnam veteran. And like a lot of people say that like that's one of the like hidden like Stan Lee gems. And overall thoughts on the issue, it kind of feels like Stan is both trying to be more literate, but he's also kind of washed already. I always find it interesting when I read like, one of these later Stan Lee issues to go to the whole month Mike saw the whole month when he chose this, but I like to go to it and see which books Stan is still writing, which ones he dropped off already. So by this point he's well gone from X-Men and Avengers, um, and everything like that, but he's still sticking on Spider-Man, he's on Thor, he's on Cap, he's on this. So he's still really entrenched. I mean, I don't think he leaves until like 71 or something. Um, I mean, Kirby's still here, obviously, at this point. Obviously, not drawing Daredevil. And on that note, Colin, his layouts get a little too fancy at points. He's, has them like intersecting and curved layout, curved borders and stuff like that. Sometimes to no real benefit, but other times it's pretty slick. And this issue has a ton of movement to show off. It's not like he was young. I mean, he started in like the late golden age, and he was right alongside Kirby and Ditko on those like monster books pre Fantastic Four. But I think, especially on Daredevil, he has a really long run. I think he really evolves his style, and then, later on, everyone knows that he specifically evolved his style. He went in a more like expressive and noirish and like more sketchy direction. And it's very clean here, but it looks really nice.
I don't know if we want to do this for every book, but the story of why I chose this one is I did look at the other ones. And I was like, all right, Stand Still and Cap with Jack, Avengers that didn't look particularly interesting. Neither did Spider-Man. So the eye grabbing one on this is kind of one of those covers that's always placed on a poster, but it's also at the time where the word mark logo for the book is not the traditional like here comes Daredevil, the man without fear. It's this weird, like it's the word dare within a hyphen, and then underneath it is the word devil. I looked up how long this word mark was there for. I think it's only like 4 or 5 issues. But I always looked at that and I went, that's just not right. Like it just doesn't look right. And never have I thought it looked particularly good. But also, if you notice the background of this cover, it's Daredevil swinging with the Jester, but the Statue of Liberty in the background is a black and white photograph of the Statue of Liberty. It's not drawn. It's by far the weirdest cover out of the bunch for this month for Marvel from the ones I was looking at. And that combined with the weird word mark I don't like, I was like, okay, well, it's Stan and Gene Colan. Let's at least see what's going on here.
Yeah, there were a handful of those weird like collage slash photo cover things in this era. Like there's issues of Fantastic Four where Kirby, I mean, he doesn't literally, it's not quite as basic as that, as just like background photo. He's trying to do like crazy cosmic stuff, but I think that was kind of a trend in the era. And yeah, I didn't even really take notice of the logo, but that's a really interesting point. And I pulled up the wiki again, and it's kind of interesting because the 2 issues on either side of that weird logo are also like super iconic Daredevil covers. Because number 43 is a Jack Kirby cover of him in the boxing ring with Cap, and then 48 is probably the most famous Stiltman cover. So just kind of interesting.
Yeah, it, it's one of the worst word marks I've ever seen. It just looks bad. Like Daredevil, like it never looked right to me. I'm guessing, did they try to make the hyphen work like Spider-Man and it just fell flat and they abandoned it? I don't really know. I'd like a detailed story on that from someone maybe to eventually shed some light on it. But it's one of those less pointed out things and just go, well, that's weird, and you move on. But I'll move on to my first book, which is Submariner number 35 from March of 1971. I was waiting for that. There we go. It wasn't going, but Submariner number 35 from March 1971. Roy Thomas and Sal Buscema. So, all right, second book we venture in the 1970s now, and Vince chose this for me, which I said at the beginning of the show, it was a series I was curious in, but hesitant to read because I'm not the biggest Roy Thomas fan, and I think this encapsulates a lot of the reasons for why I'm kind of iffy on Roy Thomas a lot of the time. We do open with a great splash page of Hulk and Subby sitting on Surfer's board, hovering above the Earth. Subby and Hulk are breathing right now because they're in space, but I'm just going to assume it's power cosmic shenanigans with Surfer. But they're high above the Earth, hovering is the Submariner, is wanting to go and look at and possibly destroy a UN experimental weather device that's set to be activated on this like island, and he's gained the help of the Hulk and the Surfer to stop it. So when they land at the UN station, the army officers think that they're there, like they're being attacked, so they dispatch the Avengers to stop them. So we get a split team of the Avengers because half the team is heading to film a charity spot for television. So this leaves us with Iron Man, Thor, and Goliath, who Captain America says is the toughest event of three Avengers for this to be taken care of, while the others go to the charity spot. And Goliath, by the way, at this point is Clint Barton. So no longer Hawkeye. He's in that weird phase where he's Goliath. But we get the big superhero squabble battle. And then Namor has Atlantean scientists who are also looking to fix the machine because they discover like it's broken. So they're also there to like prevent it from just causing this huge catastrophe. And once the Avengers learn that the fighting is like, hey, we're just trying to prevent this thing, the fighting stops and, the day is saved. Namor says his goodbye to this trio that he's assembled, but thinks to himself that they're going to be teaming up. They'll team up again eventually. But this makes sense as the publication date for this book is March 1971, like I said earlier. But the publication for Marvel Feature #1, which is the first appearance of the Defenders, which all three of these guys are members of, is December 1971. And also, the writer is Roy Thomas. So, I'm assuming this is like some tryout for the Defenders, which eventually happens later. But my issue with this are that Thomas devotes like the first 5 or 6 pages of this to just setting the story up. And like there's like this weird chase for 3 pages with the Hulk, and it's such a slog to get through that finally when it does pick up, we see the Avengers and the arrival, but it could have happened much earlier and streamed on or I'm starting to think that maybe the biggest problem with Thomas is that he just needs an editor to be like, you can cut this out and just get to the meat of your story with this weird runaround that goes on. The Sal Buscema art is good, but I looked it up on the Marvel Wiki says that Herb Trimpe had to fix the Hulk's face on the cover. It's not. It's the Hulk's face is like a little bit weird here, but otherwise it still looks good, and I do think the cover looks pretty good too. But Vince, any story on for why you chose this one?
Yeah, I mean, not something super particular. I think Namor has been a character that you've kind of gone back and forth on, and you've said that you don't really care about him, but then you've expressed a little bit of interest at times. So I figured, why the hell not? And obviously, I knew the key issue aspect of this, connected to Defenders. This is actually really the second Proto Defenders arc. The previous one was like a very loose crossover between issues of Doctor Strange, Submariner, and Hulk, like 10 issues before this one. And the next arc within Subby, just for the hell of it, is interesting because the death of his love interest, Lady Dorma, 2 years before that, Gwen Stacy dies. So almost similar to a couple other instances, we kind of grabbed the random issue out of a string of pretty crucial issues for the character. I thought the art was good, but I personally think, Sal, that you mentioned how apparently they felt the need for Trimpe to fix Hulk's face. And at this point, I'm pretty sure, I'm almost certain that Trimpe is still the regular artist on the Hulk book. And Sal will become the regular artist on Defenders. And eventually on Hulk, maybe both of those at the same time for a period. Back in the day, some of these crazy artists were doing like several books a month. But I think Sal really levels up as he finds his feet a little bit into Defenders and then fully establishes himself on the Hulk. And then I also love his kind of 90s era where his style changes again, which we've discussed on other shows.
Yeah, I think I would agree with that statement that he definitely levels up because if you look at the issues Defenders, they look really good and crisp. This one, you can start to see it forming. It's not quite there yet, but it's still really good. Like all the action scenes look good. Like I'm not saying it looks bad at all. It still looks great. I would say this is not the last time we'll see Sal Buscema on the show. He'll come back as an inker for a book later on, but overall, I was an issue I enjoyed, but it's still that flip floppy way of Roy Thomas for me. But at least I'll let you know I think through time I've mellowed out a lot on the Submariner. I think I'm at the point where I'm like I like Namor, definitely not as much as Aquaman, but I'm around for a Namor appearance, and I'd like to see more of him. Definitely not in the current way that he is in Marvel with that stupid bad costume, but I'm down for I'm down for more Namor though. But I chose next for you Justice League of America number 101.
Yes, so this is written by Len Wein, art by Dick Dillon, inks by Joe Giella. This is smack in the middle of the Eighth Soldier of Victory Crisis crossover. It's a September cover date, so the street date when it was actually, initially hit the stands would have been in the summer, which is, almost every year back in the day, JLA would feature a big crisis arc like this. When DC collects it, they often refer to them as the Crisis on Multiple Earth stories or whatever. So a depowered Diana Prince from Earth 1, which is important to note. This is in the Diana Prince mod era where she's depowered and she doesn't wear a costume and she hangs out with I Ching. She's basically like in the JLA. Actually, I don't know 100% where she is. I think it's like the JLA base, and maybe this is the era where they're in that mountain or whatever, Mount Justice. She's catching up with Alan Scott, Mr. Terrific, and Earth 2 Robin, wearing a interesting Earth costume that he adopts as he becomes an adult. You don't really ever get a great shot of it. Like, he's in this book, and there's several scenes with him and these other characters, but you don't get really a great angle on Robin here. And so the story here is that the Seven Soldiers of Victory, which was a Golden Age team, I forget it's confusing because DC has been through so many mergers, and I think the Seven Soldiers is somewhat related to that, where Wonder Woman and Flash and Green Lantern are from All American publications, whereas Batman and Superman are from National, whatever, and then eventually merged, and they kept the name National, and then eventually DC, whatever. They were all out in the Justice League, but I'm pretty sure the Seven Soldiers is other All-American characters, or maybe it's other national characters. I don't remember. It's basically like all the other somewhat relevant enough superhero characters, and some of them aren't even really superheroes that are not in the league in the Golden Age. And they even had their own team adventures in the Golden Age. Similar format to the Golden Age Justice Society, where they weren't usually actually on the page together. It would be like a framing device setting up the mission, and then each member would do their own chapter, and oftentimes drawn by the artists of their regular stories by themselves and stuff like that. So they were thrown back in time, so the League and the Justice Society have to find them. Plus, there's this mystery lingering of a discovered grave of the 8th member of the soldiers, but we always knew it as the 7 soldiers, so who the heck is that? And then we get that similar to that format, that split up chapter format with different members. That's really how a large bulk of Justice League was as well. So first we have Superman, Sandman, and Metamorpho, who is not a League member, but I guess he just decided to show up. They are back during the time of Genghis Khan as he invades a town in China, and Shining Knight is under Genghis Khan's control. So they're trying to, rescue him and get him out of the brainwashing. At one point, Metamorpho turns the bottom of his body into a tank made out of cobalt, and then with the help of Sandman, develops projectiles to non-lethally attack their opponents. Pretty cool moment. Very goofy. Even with Metamorpho's expansive powers, I don't know if they'd do that today. Then we see Hawkman, Dr. Midnight, and Wonder Woman of Earth 2 help Robin Hood and his merry men storm a castle, and they rescue Green Arrow because, of course, Green Arrow, Robin Hood makes sense. Then Batman, Starman, and Hourman save Stripesy from enslavement in ancient Egypt. And Stripesy is the sidekick of the Star Spangled Kid, but of course is an adult, while the Star Spangled Kid is the teenager or even preteen. Always a funny dynamic. And of course, Stripesy, I believe his name is Pat Dugan, grows up to be the stepfather of Stargirl, and he's on TV right now, and eventually pilots Stripe, the big mecha that Stargirl hangs out with. So, I think I said, but he was enslaved in ancient Egypt. So basically, that's what's covered here. We just get a couple of the characters being rescued. I'm pretty sure there were a couple in the previous issue, and then this is continued next issue. As far as kind of criticism and stuff, there's one creepy close-up panel of Starman's face sweating. It's very weird. Dick Dillon on JLA, by definition, he is, with some other, names like Kurt Swan and things like that. And you can argue, as you go later on, like 90s, you could say bits and pieces of Byrne and Perez. But Dick Dillon is by definition, DC house style, but that's not bad. It's not like he was a bad artist, and it's a pretty exciting story. And for someone who doesn't know, I will spoil that the unknown soldier, the 8th one, is Wing, the Crimson Avengers sidekick. And that is JLA 100. 101.
I'm a simple man. I see a team up between the JLA and some Golden Age heroes, and that was like, all right, you'll probably enjoy this. It's not the only Len Wein book that we'll get on the show. That's actually the next issue exactly is Len Wein, but I couldn't get into it. I tried reading it, and I think that I think Dick Dillon's art turns me off. I think it's somehow like it's 1972, but his art still looks like it's from the 1950s. It's very simplistic compared to other things that you're starting to see by that point in the 70s. That it's a real turnoff. Like I can see the script, like I don't know, you get that thing where the script doesn't fit the art. That's kind of what I start feeling with Dick Dillon in 1970s JLA. Kind of. But overall, like I'm happy to see that you enjoyed it, and like I'd say your description makes me want to read it, but then I tried to read it and I didn't like it. That's sometimes the disconnect I have with wanting to read older books, where I get excited and then it doesn't deliver in the way that I want it to. But I would say the next one delivered for me, which was DC Comics Presents number 29 from January 1981. This is Len Wein, and Jim Starlin is the artist on this. So we get and if you don't know, DC Comics Presents is the Superman team-up book, while Batman's was Brave and the Bold. But we get a team-up here between Superman and the Spectre, which seems to be, a pretty interesting pairing. The Spectre is always kind of is he really in the realm character? Like he is part of the JSA, but like technically shouldn't he be on a higher plane? The Spectre has kind of always been a weird character to me in terms of placing him between should he be talking to other heroes or not. Vince, you can share your thoughts when we break for discussion on it, but that's always been my interpretation of the Spectre. He's kind of like another plane being. But also, I will say this is taking place right in the middle / right after. I guess this is after the arc that introduced Mongol and Warworld with Wayne and Starlin. Starlin, of course, creates Thanos at Marvel, then did it again at DC with Mongol. They're very similar, which of course is funny because Thanos is just his take on Darkseid, and then he gave DC another Darkseid with Mongol. It's a whole thing, but I have read the Superman versus Mongol trade paperback that contains the bulk of this. That collection has DC Comics Presents issues number 27, 28, 36, and 43. So right in the middle of that is this issue here with issue 29. So Superman is racing through space to try and catch Supergirl, who ran off ahead in a previous issue while they were fighting World, but she passed out, so she's just careening through the galaxy at super speed, and Superman has to push himself to the absolute limit, where what happens next is I can only describe as him going so fast he breaks the plane of reality where he's met by the Spectre, and the Spectre stops him to basically lecturing him about the limitations of his powers, and what he's doing is not meant for the eyes of mortals. The heavy emphasis here is that if he keeps going at this pace, he's going to meet God and break into heaven. It's not quite subtle, but enough where you're like, I see what you're doing here. It's like I said, it's not very subtle, but they're like skirting a line because I don't think DC can exactly imply that it's heaven, but that's the implied implication here. We even hear an omniscient voice of warning, which it's God. But Superman, he tries to fight the Spectre, but of course that doesn't work because the Spectre's like, well, you can't hit me or damage me. I'm on a higher plane being than you. So he's forced to listen and learn. We even see Superman have to fight the evil version of himself that is made up of just all of his unkept power and morals, which the Spectre like projects in front of him, which is very similar to that of the Superman versus Superman fight in Superman 3. And that movie is from 1983, and this is 1981. So part of me is wondering if this was maybe used as a basis for that, though probably not, because outside of like, base origins material, those movies have no real connection to the comic books really at all, and definitely not by Superman 3, for example, though, Lana Lang is in that movie, so there's something there wise, but otherwise, very, very loose connection between the Christopher Reeve Superman movies and the Superman comic books. Though Superman does learn that all he's needed to do was simply ask the Spectre to help him find Supergirl, and he obliges and just magically poofs her right to them. Where at this point, Superman, apologizes to the Spectre and sets forth his journey back home with Supergirl as she's, waking up because she was passed out. And in their journey home, he's going to tell the story of exactly what happened on his recovery together. Overall, I like this. Paying attention to Jim Starlin's backgrounds, you get a lot of Starlin cosmic backgrounds here because most of this most of this comic book is set on like a plane of space. So the kind of fancy, like the star sparkles and stuff in the background by Starlin you're going to get. And it looks great. I like Starlin's Superman. I've read most of, that War World stuff with Mongol and that trade paperback. No, it looks good. And then I like Len Wein's writing here, but I do think the breaking forth the plane to heaven it's just one of those weird DC Comics Superman things that you can, look up and kind of laugh about. It definitely gets to the point of Superman being too powerful, I think, where he's breaking planes of existence. But Vince, thoughts on DC Comics Presents number 29?
Yeah, I think you did a pretty good job covering the actual book. Starlin is great. Spectre lets him do a lot of those similar cosmic trademarks, as you'd see on, Adam Warlock and things like that he was doing in the 70s and Captain Marvel. This is also part of a famous string of issues, similar to what I've been saying on other things, or maybe I just think every issue, before the 2000s is famous. But on the other side, before War World, is a Green Lantern team up by Starlin, and which unrelated really to Superman and anything, also happened to have a backup with the first appearance of the New Teen Titans together. The backup here is Whatever Happened to Blank feature, and in this case, it's Dr. Midnight, who I saw on a previous issue for the show. And so this Whatever Happened to insert character ran for a bunch of issues that DC Comics presents. It's a really weird backup. Like it's like this fanboy type idea. It's kind of like Marvel's What If, but filling in actual canon. And it's mostly for Golden Age characters or obscure characters, but a lot of those Golden Age stories are kind of relevant to things that are developed later on in the 80s with those Golden Age characters like All-Star Squadron, Infinity Inc. So there's weird stuff like the death of Airwave, the Golden Age one, which sets up the career of the younger Airwave, who occasionally pops up in his cousin Hal Jordan, Green Lantern's books, and the death of Crimson Avenger, who I referenced. His sidekick had already died, in that JLA arc. Or in one of these, you get to see Rex the Wonder Dog and Detective Chimp find and drink from the Fountain of Youth.
Well, it's, crazy backups. I did read it. Like, it was interesting. Like, I'm familiar with reading other things that I know that the original Dr. Midnight, it's Dr. Midnight, right?
Yeah.
I always get Dr. Midnight and Hourman confused because they kind of look similar to me. But yeah, I know that Dr. Midnight was the first one, at least, was forced to retire because he did go totally blind. And that's the start of that here. That's the plot of it. So he's going to try to find new glasses while also trying to, fight it entirely as a blind man, which is, a decent premise of like aging out a hero. But other than that, like, there's not much to write home about it. It's definitely not as good as the main feature and not as notable, but I think the next issue is pretty notable. Captain America number 300. It was the final fight, Vince, between Cap and Red Skull. They never fought again after this, right?
No. This is from 1984. Plot by James DeMatteis, script by Michael Ellis, art by Paul Neary. So this is the finale of a long arc that starts around like issue 290/292/293, depending on where you put it. And this ends the run by J.M. DeMatteis. The initial focal character as we get into this issue is the Native American character Black Crow. And he's experiencing visions, and it's basically giving us a recap montage of the arc so far on a double-page spread, which is pretty helpful. And especially, in this context, this retro thing where we're just jumping right in. And it's basically just telling us Cap's been through some shit recently. And as we get into the action, Cap and Red Skull, they're exchanging blows as well as monologues. Skull's aging has caught up to him, so he poisoned Cap so they'd go out together. Just like a creepy Joker Batman kind of story that Scott Snyder would write. He tries to goad Cap into killing him, but obviously Steve pulls back at the last minute, even though he's tempted. Classic hero moment. But the Red Skull dies anyway from the poison / his age, related factors. And there is a subplot along the way of some supporting characters of Cap's that are fighting death in a hospital as well. And it lines up, it's intercut, all as you expect. Cap blacks out from the poison and trying to get out of there. But Black Crow shows up and saves him and then runs away. Cap's allies of Falcon, Nomad, Bernie Rosenthal, and Arnie, I forget his last name, were thought to be dead because going into, when the fight is happening, Cap really thinks so. The Red Skull has killed them all. So that's why he's like really amped up. But they were fine. There is a reference made to Skull's daughter who showed up issues before this. And there's the next issue is actually like an epilogue kind of, and she shows up there. And she's introduced for this arc. I think her first appearance is like 292 or something. And years later, she appears in other Cap books under the alias Sin. At this time, she's called like Mother Superior or something. But she also has like the Sisters of Sin as like her sidekicks, I believe. Paul Neary's art is fine. It's not nearly as great as Mike Zeck, who did a lot of the DeMatteis run before this. And beyond the story, the big thing to mention here is that Michael Ellis scripting credit, which is not a person. It's an alias DeMatteis is using to essentially partly take his name off the book due to editorial interference. It's kind of like, crap, I forget what, in Hollywood, when scriptwriters want to like remove their name from a movie, or directors, there's like a common pseudonym that they use, and I forget what it is. The other example I know is that when Steve Englehart removed his name from books due to editorial muckery, he used John Harkness. He did that on his Fantastic Four run. And I think Chichester did something towards the very end of his Daredevil run. And the reason the editorial interference, and I'm not going to put a line in the sand and make a definitive statement, but I kind of side with the editors here. Because DeMatteis wanted to, I forget whether he actually wanted to kill Steve or if he wanted to injure and then retire Steve Rogers, but his plan was to have Black Crow take over as the new Captain America, which would be pretty interesting, of course. And if it had happened, obviously would be way ahead of its time, compared to other characters taking on the mantle, such as Bucky Barnes and Sam Wilson. And obviously, as a Native American character, would be, opens a ton of angles that you could use as a writer to talk about Captain America and this country and all kinds of issues.
It was good. The Hollywood pseudonym you're thinking of is Alan Smithy, which really isn't used anymore. It's kind of been basically phased out. I think there's other ones, but I don't have the time to look them up as we're doing the show right now. But I think, at least according to the Marvel Wiki on this issue, the pseudonym of Michael Ellis was suggested to DeMatteis by Mark Grunwald. So that's something that's, the editor who then, goes on to have a healthy run on Captain America suggests the writer to choose the pseudonym, which is a little bit weird, but, and this is pre-Grunwald. What issue does Grunwald start with?
Yeah, so that's the weird thing. So, this ends DeMatteis. The next issue is an epilogue, but the next issue...
Carlin.
Yeah, so Carlin writes like 301 to 306, which is not a ton of issues, but when they're coming out monthly, that's half a year. So my understanding is that Mike Carlin was the intended next writer of Captain America. And I don't know what happened there because, he was in Marvel's office as an editor, but I guess, like a lot of these writers at Marvel in the 70s and 80s were editors. Obviously, that's what Stan Lee and Roy Thomas and Jared Conway, everyone was doing. To a lesser extent at DC too, but I mean, Carlin was writing things like he wrote The Thing after John Byrne left that, and so I think what may have lined up, because I don't remember the chronology, it may have been that Grunwald was like, "Yeah, go bye. I want to I want to just write the book myself and edit myself, so you can just catch a hike after 6 issues." Or if it lines up with Carlin leaving to DC alongside Byrne to edit Superman. I'm not sure. It could be both, but Grunwald jumps on with 307.
Right. And then we've talked about the Mark Grunwald in past episodes because we've had Mark Grunwald Captain America issues in past retros. But I would have to say Paul Neary does about as good as a job as you can for a Mike Zeck lookalike. It's still good in its own right, but I do think that he's going for that Mike Zeck look, and even the cover for this is Mike Zeck and Paul Neary. So you can open it up and you go, oh, it's not totally different from the cover, but how much of that is Zeck versus Neary? You'd have to look at that yourself. Or the fight, I think, is good, but I do think a lot of the luster is like Black Condor takes up like the first 6 to 8 pages. This isn't an oversized issue though. It runs pretty fast, and I do think the fight, choreography there is pretty good too. Is cat and then it's funny how history repeats itself, right? So then we have old Steve, and old Steve's fixed in 301 because I did jump and I skimmed through it. I was like, oh, he's fine by the end of 301. But at the end of Remender's run, that's when Steve was rendered old, and then Sam Wilson takes over. But that's 30 some years later, which is just interesting to look at how some things are repeated in different ways and changed going forward. But otherwise, like, it was a solid issue. I don't think it was bad by any means, and I thought the fight was pretty good. But if you don't have anything else to say, I'll go into Web of Spider-Man number 95.
Yeah, the one final thing I'll say is that for the collector types, for the graphic novel collectors, this is an interesting to note because this is one of those epic collection gap volumes. So you have things on the other side and each side. So there's just one volume. So we know exactly what's going to be in it. It just doesn't exist yet. And so issues 286 to 301 will be volume 11 of Cap. And the other major arc in this period, I think it's like 286 to 288, is a Deathlock arc with Cap, obviously.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll go into Web of Spider-Man number 95 as I catch myself there. Howard Mackie, Alex Saviuk, Joe Rubinstein, December of 1992, Spirits of Venom Part 1. Vince delivered on the fun team-up for me, as we do share a love of 1990s Howard Mackie Ghost Rider. And here in this issue, it's a team-up. We get Spider-Man, Danny Ketch Ghost Rider, Johnny Blaze, who is the Blaze persona at this point with the Hellfire shotgun, and Venom. That's a packed lineup right there. Spider-Man is trying to take the Hobgoblin to the police after the conclusion of the last arc. Hobgoblin was trying to kill with the photojournalist Nick Katzenberg, and Spider-Man stopped him, but they're attacked by the demon versions of Hobgoblin and Spider-Man, Spider Doppelganger and Demogoblin. And in the sewers, we see Ghost Rider and Johnny on the hunt to stop the reincarnation of Death Spawn, who I think was that's Deathwatch Reborn, right? So they run into Venom, who's just chilling out in the sewers, and he's like, "Yeah, I'll team up with you guys." Which it's bad and schlocky storytelling, but when it's the characters involved and with how outlandish the plot is, it's one of those things where you go, "Yeah, that might as well happen," and you just kind of gloss over it. So they run to the sewers. Venom just agrees to help them. So they're fighting demons in the sewer, and then on the top side, Spidey manages to catch a breather at a church, as he's being chased, but not before Demogoblin and Spider Doppelganger show back up to wreck the place, and then where the paths of our heroes converge. And this is the setup to be continued throughout multiple titles. Mackie delivers on the schlock. It's the schlock that you want and you're expecting from Howard Mackie at this point. Alex Saviuk is pretty good on what I would consider the fourth Spider-Man title. Vince has a different opinion on that, and we'll get to it in a second. At least on not on Saviuk, but on the what's the constituted as the fourth and the third Spider-Man title. But dude had the longest tenured run on Web of Spider-Man, beginning with issue 35 and going to 116. So overall, fun stuff. Though I wish we got more team up here, but it is just the start of a story arc.
Yeah, I don't know if it was this issue or the next, but I recall I fought one of our friends for this one of our Harrisburg area comic hunting road trips several years ago, because I was looking at it for Ghost Rider reasons, and our friend was looking at it for Venom reasons. The Hag and Troll characters here, who are pretty downplayed because they're kind of swiped out of the way because there are way bigger threats that show up. They're very 90s characters, kind of cringe. But then Demogoblin and Doppelganger just like totally make me think of the 90s. You know, their characters right out of the 90s Spider-Man, you know, appeared in the TV show, I believe, and everything like that. But this is fun. There are moments where it gets a little sloppy, but I think Saviuk is really, really underrated. And obviously, I was just talking about how I liked 90s Sal Buscema, who was on Spectacular Spider-Man for a huge period. So, you know, in this era where there were 4 Spider-Man titles, despite that, you know, everyone just thinks of McFarlane, Larson, Bagley. And I think Saviuk and Buscema a lot of times get left out of their conversation unfairly. And so my thing is, I mean, this is just totally nonsense semantics, but I would imagine that the adjectiveless Spider-Man's title, you know, the one that Todd McFarlane launched to write and draw himself, I imagine it was still outselling this. But in terms of like actual relevance and stories and everything like that, I would definitely consider this to be the third Spidey book. And also in terms of, you know, when the book was introduced, this would be the third one as well, you know, because this replaced Marvel Team Up, and then obviously the McFarlane one comes, you know, around this time. Because around, you know, McFarlane is gone, even Eric Larson is gone. You know, they both went off to do Image. So the adjectiveless book is kind of in this extended musical chairs fill-in period. And Howard Mackey, who also writes this, moves over to Spider-Man eventually, like even a little bit after Maximum Carnage, which hasn't happened yet. And they don't become the consistent creative team on that book until like a year and a half after this issue. And then I feel like in terms of quality, Spider-Man and Web got like really, really bad in the mid 90s. So I'm not going to make a strong point there.
Yeah. Well, we've had the displeasure of sharing some of those really bad mid to late 90s Web of Spider-Man and adjectiveless issues together with Howard Mackey still in tow. But I would say Saviuk is good. He kind of reminds me, there's a couple panels where he looks like Todd here. There's a couple panels where it looks like Buscema, but it kind of has the feeling of the animated series that it reminds me of too. It's a good mix. Like I think, you know, with a run that long, what did I say? Issues 35 to 116. Like it's a good, healthy run that, you know, people should, you know, go up and look up his stuff because it's pretty good. But I'll move on to our next book.
Yes. Avengers number 4 from 98. This is the Heroes Return volume from Kurt Busiek and George Perez. This is the final part / epilogue of the opening arc, which is basically the idea is every Avenger ever versus Morgan Le Fay. So now that that conflict is down, there's basically just too many Avengers everywhere. They all trip over each other just trying to stop Whirlwind, you know, pretty low tier Avengers / Ant-Man / Iron Man villain, I think mostly associated with those characters. And then the founding members, they're in the Avengers Mansion in a back room with new government liaison Dwayne Freeman, and they're trying to figure out the new lineup because they can't have, you know, 200 Avengers. And a lot of those people have their own responsibilities anyways. So Cap, Iron Man, and Thor sign up. They wanted at least 3 of the founders for arbitrary reasons to get things back, you know, settled. Hank and Jan are out. They've got their own things to deal with. Scarlet Witch and Vision are next, and they're both still dealing with their complicated post-Vision Quest relationship. He's no longer White Vision, but his personality's still off. Their kids, I don't think, are a thing right now. All that stuff. Then the next choice is Carol Danvers, and everyone basically vouches for her, and she takes the alias Warbird instead of Ms. Marvel because she can no longer take the binary form. And there's a hint that Tony suspects she's an alcoholic. So for a second, it's kind of a weird move. For a second, he objects to having her on the team, but then he doesn't want to explain himself. So he's just like, fine, I'll go with you guys. So she's on the team. Then Justice and Firestar of the New Warriors go take out Whirlwind by themselves to try to prove themselves that they're worthy of being quote unquote called up, because there was always it wasn't actually a strict relationship between them, but the New Warriors was essentially seen as junior Avengers, and Hawkeye basically sneaks out with them and basically catches them defeating Whirlwind, and he's impressed, but he also has ulterior motives. His idea is to have a power move and try and exert his leadership over his part of leadership over the Avengers by saying, yeah, of course I'll be on the team, and you have to take these two people that are going to be my sidekicks and stuff like that. But Cap and everyone was like, well, we only have one slot left and we were going to give it to you anyways. But they're like, okay, we respect the initiative, so you two, you're also joining, but you're reservists, so it kind of counts, kind of doesn't. And of course, then they have a press conference and it ends with the classic Avengers Assemble line and splash page. I think this is perfect. It's kind of, if you're looking for action, you're not getting it here. I mean, the opening Whirlwind fight and the ending Whirlwind fight with Justice and Firestar, it's actually surprisingly fun compared to what you'd expect given the rest of the premise of this issue. But this is definitely an in-between issue. It's a setup issue. There's lots of footnotes and as well as less direct references to what Thor has going on in his solo book, what Cap has going on, a little bit of Iron Man as well as the book Heroes for Hire, which She-Hulk and Black Knight represent here. And I think that's a title from the late 90s by John Ostrander, which has kind of been unfairly forgotten, though Marvel did put out paperbacks of it not too long ago. And then obviously the New Warriors is referenced. And I thought this was really fun. I mean, I'm really into especially when it comes to the Avengers, all this dumb bylaws and forming the team and stuff like that. It's a surprisingly small team from where they land on things at the end here and solidify it, but it'll grow, obviously.
I think anytime. Yeah, I forgot. I thought I hit the button, but yeah, anytime you get the big, oh, what's the team going to be issue? It's always fun, no matter what kind of era you're in. And this is arguably the best Avengers run ever. I read the first omnibus on the lead up to Endgame because I was it was an Avengers mood. And classic stories in there. The big Ultron story, even the first 3 issues, which it's every Avenger ever, is pretty fun. You get some crazy costumes, but it's this team is solidified, but quickly the team's going to morph. Hawkeye's only going to stick around for about an issue, but then you get the resurrected energy version of Wonder Man. And then Vision's in a computer for most of this too, because he was destroyed at the beginning, so he's got to put himself back together. So it's kind of, I think Music does a good job of forming the team, but keeping it ever changing in and out too. I don't even I know Hank and Jan aren't part of the team, but I think they're still kind of chilling in the house just to be, because they're I can't remember if they're other reserve members or they're called in for a favor or something, but they still have a presence throughout. And it's just good. Perez's art's good, and I think the next issue is the Avengers Day Parade, and then of course things happen there, and then quickly I think the next they fight the Squadron Supreme, and then you're off to the races. I think with Avengers Forever, then Ultron. So just banger after banger here from this run, which is really celebrated. And like I said, arguably the best Avengers run ever. I would definitely think it stacks up to that. From the I've only read in the first half. I still got to read the second omnibus, but no, this is a really fun issue. Anything else to add on it? Because I think we've pretty much said all there is to say.
Yeah, I think we covered it.
But yeah, next issue is an interesting one. I think it's the most interesting pick for the show this week. It's the Creeper number 10 from September 1999, and this is Len Kameninski, Sean Martinborough, and inks by Sal Buscema. This is the second to last issue of the Creeper's second series. This is September 1998. And this series is just called The Creeper. The first was titled Beware the Creeper. And Jack Ryder is like restless in his bed, going through an adjustment and coping with his new meds meant to suppress the Creeper persona inside him. Awesome double page splash at the beginning of this issue with the kind of a character's highlights and history moments splashed on the wall as Jack's in bed staring up at the ceiling with these moments, plastered around it. Issue is told in like these brief flashbacks of Jack trying to hold himself together in the lead up to him getting these new meds from a psychiatrist. Eventually the pain's too much and the Creeper just like splits out from his chest, sharing the room with them, and then Jack tries to fight the Creeper, and after like whiffing a bunch of times manages to land like a back elbow on him. But then the Creeper then regains his footing and finds the pills, and he's like, I'm gonna swallow all your pills, Jack, and then goes crazy and jumps into the night, with that Creeper cackle that he has, now leaving Jack to pick up the pieces as the Creeper is now on the loose. This was a really interesting issue. I like the art by Sean Martinborough and Sal Buscema. I'm not as super familiar with Len Kameninski, but I know the name from like spots here and there of other works. But this is like, it definitely scratches that surface, Vince, of something I might want to check out more of or track down the back issues of the next time we eventually, go on a comic hunt when we hopefully can again, sooner rather than later. But as things start to clear up, but it's a weird issue. It looks like that by the way, he's not in Gotham City. It looks like it's set in New York, which is I don't know if that's a directly different take, because the Creeper is kind of like a Batman adjacent character, at least in my head. But overall, it's very good and very interesting. Also, the second to last issue of the book.
Yeah, this was kind of a curveball I threw at you. I don't remember, if there were a lot of other major choices I had. But this is actually a run that at some point I blind bought because it's pretty short and it has interesting kind of creative team, especially the Sean Martinborough art. So I intend to eventually probably custom bind it, put it on the shelf. I haven't gotten to it yet though. Yeah, I think the art's pretty cool, and the Creeper is always a cool character. He'll have a series like every 5 to 10 years, and it is interesting. I feel like this series was the first, at least a dedicated series, the first one to really lean in on him being like kind of cuckoo. Like, as you might imagine, because he was originally a Steve Ditko character. Like, he looks ridiculous because Steve Ditko is like has all these weird, costume design things, but he wasn't originally like really kind of this Jekyll and Hyde crazy thing. That was something that was added later on, though I kind of like it. Otherwise, he's just a normal like vigilante dude who just wears a really, really, really weird costume. But the art in here is really cool. Len Kaminsky, just quick note on that is he was the Iron Man writer in like the early '90s, early/mid '90s. So all the modular stuff, that's Len Kaminsky. He did the crappy Dr. Fate book. He did Ghost Rider 2099, and that's pretty much it. And then he has a couple like little small runs, The Creeper, and there's a book called Scare Tactics, and other obscure stuff like that.
I guess it's weird because I thought the issue initially was going to be, oh, this is all in his head, but no, the Creeper did burst out of his chest, and there are two beings, which is definitely weird. Like, and I don't know if this is the way it's played, but at least through the art, I always thought the Creeper's red hands, because he's got yellow skin, like yellow greenish skin, the green hair, but he had like red gloves. I always thought he had like red glove, but no, it's like just his skin just turns red, and the way the art is formed, the depiction of it, like I don't know if that's a different take, but it's certainly interesting and definitely different from the way I normally have perceived him. So you know, something to go maybe hunt down and check out more of. So that's always a good thing to have on these shows. But I think we go from an underrated, underlooked thing to maybe the most overlooked and published thing ever, at least when we get into the 2000s, because we're out of the 90s now. We're in 2003. It's Batman 618, and I think this is the penultimate issue of Hush.
Yes, by Jeff Loeb and Jim Lee, inks by Scott Williams, very important. This is the 11th out of 12 chapters of Hush, aka the Jason Todd resurrection. And just give me a second. So, in this weird proto Red Hood design, where he's still rocking the Robin R, he's got a trench coat, some tactical gear stuff. He's got a Jason Blood-like white streak of hair, and a super weird-looking pointy domino mask. But nah, surprise, it's Clayface. Then, as basically just like not a ton actually happens. Like once you get past that, it's just Batman kind of running around, and he eventually comes across and discovers that Harold has betrayed him, and then Harold is immediately murdered by Hush. And so Harold was like this, like he's got some kind of disabilities, and Bruce basically helped him out and was like, "Hey, you want to live in my cave and like fix my car?" And that's what happened. And he's kind of an interesting character. Like I feel like, I mean, no one loved Harold, but like he just gets murdered here and betrays Bruce for no reason. It's kind of crappy. I don't have a ton more to say about the actual like story and stuff. Um, Jim Lee's art is fantastic. A couple flashback panels have like a different style. It might be like watercolor, which is pretty neat. We know that Jim Lee has that kind of versatility more than is usually seen. You know, there's that weird Batman Europa book, and there's other things where he's kind of tried to experiment. Loeb is pretty talky here. There's lots of internal monologue captions, but I didn't feel it was super dragged down in this issue. But if I recall correctly, there are other parts of Hush where it's just like filled with uh, speech bubbles or captions and things like that. And I think, yeah, I think there are other parts of Hush that I don't like as much. This didn't. I mean, I guess the final splash page with Hush shooting Harold. I guess that's kind of a big deal and looks cool. And then there are certain moments in the Jason fight, but this issue doesn't have. I don't think like any of the like really crazy pages, that blow your mind or are super attractive.
Well, yeah, I think we're going to spend some time on this one as Hush is, it's a book that's now earned its reputation as one of those evergreen print Batman books because of the creative team. I've always maintained that Hush is a story you can try to give to someone who wants to get into Batman comics because it's got a little of everything. It's got all the villains, it's got a fight with Superman, it's got some of the sidekicks in there, and it's got the fantastic Jim Lee and Scott Williams art. If you want to, dissect it as a story, it's not aged well, and it's kind of garbo in different areas. The next issue where Batman's talking to Riddler and Arkham is the infamous speech bubble that literally wraps around the page because it's so long, it's ridiculous. This fight is still good. There's nostalgia there for me because I was like, what, 7, 8 years old? And I remember finding Batman Hush at like Barnes and Noble. Somehow it got placed in the children's reading section, and I was like, oh, it has Batman in it. So my parents, buy it for me because they see me rifling through it. And there's some pretty brutal pages for, a kid that age for Hush. But overall, there's a nostalgia factor here, like I said. But I like some of the writing by Loeb here on Batman using his detective skills to figure out that Jason isn't actually Jason because he never calls him Bruce and he never refers to himself as Jason, only Robin. Like some of that's pretty cool. And then obviously, it's I Judd Winnick captures capitalizes on the notion of what if we did actually bring Jason back and then we get Red Hood. I don't hate this costume. I wish this might be a look he'd actually ever use again, especially like the white streak in his hair because like he technically should be older. But at least the red mask. The red mask is something that's kind of stuck, at least in costume redesigns. But yeah, I'm gonna hit on the death of Harold. He's kind of like Quasimodo, but he's also like a mute. The Penguin, he's got like a gift where he's like a really good mechanic and can fix machines and invent stuff. So the Penguin was using him to make weapons. Batman saved him, and he's like, yeah, he can hang out in the cave. And we saw a little bit of his work, and his last appearance was in No Man's Land after he saved what was it, Tim, Dick, and Alfred. He kind of we just never saw him again. That was his exit. And for a character that kind of minded his own business and never had any inclination to be a bad guy, I always look back more on the jobbing out of Harold, and the death of it is really stupid and doesn't make a lot of sense. Because even in Harold's explanation is the whole explanation for why he plants the little device in the Batcave for Hush to get to Batman is like, well, he promised me he would fix me and could make me talk, and I never asked to because you did so much. Well, Bruce is like, I would have helped you if you came to me. Obviously, he would have, and then he just there's a notion for where he could have redeemed himself, and Batman already forgives him there, but instead he literally gets shot to death 2 panels later. It's never something that struck me as like a smart decision. It's just a harebrained decision for a really D, F tier, low tier supporting character that I just have never really agreed with, to the point where it's just like, I think you lose a fun little character there just for the expense of a villain, which, is the villain's best stuff comes by Paul Dini years later, and it's not here in this first story. And I even think Hush as a villain is just never that strong. So outside of that, that's the notion of Hush. I think it's your big blockbuster Michael Bay Batman movie, if that were the case. But there are elements to it where it's just it just kind of completely crumbles apart if you apply any critical thought to it. But the Jim Lee art and Scott Williams inks looks incredible. You could make the argument, was this the last great thing Jim Lee drew? Maybe. I think there's elements of Superman Unchained that look really, really good.
Well,
But
All-Star comes after this.
Bad costume for a lot of it. What?
All-Star Batman and Robin comes after this. And that looks
That's
amazing.
true. And that also looks amazing. That's a great point. I forget about All-Star Batman and Robin's existence. Not because it's bad, but just because it never finished, and it just lost to time, and it's also overshadowed by the other book with the All-Star tag on it. That being All-Star Superman. So,
but to clarify, it is bad.
I mean, yes, but also you should read All-Star Batman and Robin, because it's just I'll use the word unchained in the worst possible sense. It should be consumed and then quickly forgotten about. But and then I guess the cross hatching becomes too much when we get to new 52 with Justice League. But any other thoughts on Batman Hush? Do you want to share any thoughts on Hush here? Because I doubt we'll ever do a review of Hush itself. I've talked about it before when I used to do some Batman reviews on the old channel.
Yeah, I mean, not that much more. I think it's kind of, I don't even know that it's really, I guess it is overrated, but my main thing is for some reason, at some point it became, people ask, what Batman should I read? Hush suddenly crept up from the 10th suggestion to the 5th suggestion to the 3rd suggestion, and sometimes the 1st suggestion.
Yeah.
And I think that's, a factor of Loeb and Jim Lee. It's a good long arc and chunk. You see a lot of characters. It's got a dumb mystery element. It's got a mysterious villain. Catwoman looks sexy.
Mystery, yeah. Well, the mystery completely lost once you realize that, oh, there's a new character that we've never heard about. Oh, there's a new villain that we've never heard about. I wonder who the villain is. Like it there should never be a place where you're smarter than Batman when reading the story, and this has that. And then if you want to compare it to to Jeff Loeb's other Batman works in, Long Halloween, Dark Victory, Haunted Night, I am I forgetting anything else? Maybe I am, but like those are so much better than this in terms of the long-winded mystery. But I've always maintained that Jeff Loeb has two stories. It's the long-winded mystery, and then it's a character has died, so let me use the trope of my character writing a letter to the character that's died and in Vignette style. I always thought like that's just two trick ponies. But Batman Hush is, I think it has merit. It should be read, but I don't know. I don't think I would put it in my top 10 Batman stories. I don't even think it's in my top 15. Maybe my top 20, probably my top 25. Maybe that's a video for another time, but I'll go into our last book, Cyborg number 4 from December of 2015. David Walker, Ivan Rice. This is our final issue of the evening, and I wish we could say we're leaving off on a high note, but this is 2015's DC, so not really the case. Vince could have given me Superman, Lois, and Clark number 1 by Dan Jurgens and Lee Weeks, but instead he delivered me The Pain in Cyborg number 4, and this was the first volume of Cyborg in his own ongoing title, though it only ran from 12 issues from 2015 to 2016. He would get a Rebirth book that ran for 23 issues, though, so from what I can decipher reading this issue, Cyborg has set his base of operations in Detroit and is trying to figure out why Doctors Thomas Morrow and Laurie Carmichael have been transformed into these techno-virus creatures. And he's also getting help from the Metal Men, his kind of side characters, and his father. We also have two versions of Sarah Charles here, one from our normal timeline and one that has emerged from a bad alternate reality where Cyborg has died and the techno-zombies took over. So she's trying to prevent this timeline from happening in the regular timeline. So we get one of those stories. Well, the Metal Men are also they're like on some fetch quest to get supplies for something they need to make. They're not a big factor here. A lot of this issue is devoted to the backstory of the alternate Earth Sarah Charles, but then the doctors break out of their containment, and then the big action ensues. Where the cliffhanger here is Cyborg getting hit by a giant dragon-like techno zombie. Oh no! What's going to happen next? That's our cliffhanger. Overall, this is a competent issue 4 in the middle of a first arc. I like some of the elements here, like Cyborg being with the Metal Men, for example, is a fun idea. I like the base of operations being in Detroit. Overall, the alternate history prevention is something that, for me, that right now I'm burnt out on. And I also don't think it should necessarily be used for your first arc. Ivan Reis's art it's a little messy here, some flat faces going on. I do like his design for Cyborg here, though. It's I've read better stuff from David Walker, and I've also read better stuff by Ivan Reis. This is not. I would rank this like a good C minus. It's not so bad I never want to read this run, but it's just not notable. Which you could make arguably maybe that's worse, because then if it's not infamous and it's not famous, it's just lost to the ether of a bunch of comic books. But that's Cyborg number 4.
Yeah, this is. I mean, to be fair, in another time, in another place, we have covered Lois and Clark technically.
Technically,
And in fact, also, I don't even remember what it was, but I selected something else initially, but then we changed it for various reasons. And sadly, there's just not a lot of great options in 2015 from DC, as we've kind of hinted at throughout the whole show. I hate how the Metal Men look here. They're just like these awkward, like normal looking humans, but plasticky, and then they're color coded. Even though on paper, Cyborg and the Metal Men is a great team up. It makes perfect sense to me. There's a lot of, interesting things you can do there. As far as, identity and, am I man, am I a machine, things like that. I mean, we're just reading one issue, but there's not a ton of that here. And for some reason, I also thought that these techno zombie things were somehow related to Grid from Justice League, because I know Grid was like heavily tied to Cyborg. You know, that was Jeff Johns' whole thing, was really trying to put over Cyborg and Justice League and things like that. So I mean, I guess the point there is it just further shows how like I'm both kind of lost and also don't care about a lot of this era of DC.
I think you think Grid was more of a factor than he really was. This is like the third time I've had a conversation with you where you thought Grid was involved in something. And I was like, no.
I don't know. It was like third arc, right? Like the one before Trinity War. I mean, I guess you know, in the New 52 and Modern Comics, where every arc is like 6 issues, and then of course the final Justice League arc from Johns was like 12 issues, the Dark Side War. So there's only like 5 arcs in his Justice League run.
None of them particularly great.
No, especially not the first one, especially not Trinity War.
There's like one with Despero that's really bad too. Forever Evil is also not great. We talked about that first issue.
Yeah.
So
yeah, so that's the show. It's kind of sad because you do mention how there's a Cyborg series that follows this in Rebirth, and it actually lasted longer than this one. Though this one was kind of capped by nature, because basically this was like DCU, and DC launched like a dozen titles, and they only ran 12 issues because then they cut everything to make room for the Rebirth relaunch. But so it could be that this sold better than the Rebirth one. But the Rebirth one ran like 2 years. But from what I can tell, like you go look up like any forum post, like asking like rank Rebirth or what are the best Rebirth, what's the worst Rebirth. Cyborg is like almost always at the very bottom, and so it's kind of sad that DC like they haven't really figured out how to click with Cyborg on his own. Let alone obviously, you know, not going to get into it too much, but it's all kinds of complicated thing where you know, DC going back and forth on whether they want him to be acknowledged as a Titan, whether they want him to be on the Justice League, et cetera, et cetera.
well,
And I
now he's
guess,
a Titan again.
yeah, yep, that's it. So it's kind of unfortunate. The
I think there's good to it. You know, the response to him in the Snyder cut was well received, with a much expanded role, and then also well received in the Doom Patrol show. So he's translated to the screen pretty well. It's just now the matter of what's his spot in comics, which is
I forgot he was in Doom Patrol too, which to me, you know, as a comics person, makes 0 sense. I don't understand that at all. But
it
whatever.
doesn't really make sense, but it's done well. Basically, we can end before we go to picks with Vince. You should watch Doom Patrol because it's really good. But picks of the week. What was your top? It can be from anything you read. It didn't have to be one of the books you read. Like you had to recap.
I'm gonna give it to Avengers, number 4.
Okay, Avengers number 4. I'm looking like normally I have mine chosen beforehand, so I gotta look through. I mean, I can say it right now. It wasn't Cyborg. I didn't read Avengers for the week of the show. I think it might have to be. I'm going to go with DC Comics Presents number 29, just because it's got a little of everything in it. It's a little wild, but you still got a competent and good story by Len Wein, and then also you get the Jim Starlin art, and then Spectre's always fun to play around with and see. So I'm going to go with that one. But like there were, I was happy. Like I thought we had a good mix of stuff here. This is definitely a gimmick I'd like to see again. But I think we have we're going to do retros for the rest of the month, just because these are pretty fun. But I think we have another fun one next week planned for you. But other than that, I got nothing else. Vince, you have anything else?
No, stay safe.
If not, okay. Well, we'll see you next week then. Take care. Bye bye.